Really what I should do is get a job where I can just make funny remarks, or any remarks at all about what's going on.
They're racing.
I got the horse right
The
here.
ponies at Canterbury Park, odds making, the twins, Vikings, and the Stretch and Z Show. Politics and big city newsrooms where reporters were actually reporters. The Deadpool, tennis, and drive time radio.
We don't have programming meetings on the KQ Morning Show.
And more tennis. Mike Stretch Gelfand may no longer be on the morning show, but he still swings a racket and splashes vinegar.
Democratic Visions is independently handcrafted by lefty Southwest Suburban volunteers for the entire metro region. Here's producer Jeff Strate.
Welcome. For years, Mike Gelfand held the KQ Morning Show in check. Morning show host Tom Bernard and company drove one of the most successful drive time radio shows in the nation. It is still going strong even without Mike Gelfand. Mike, welcome.
Nice to be here. Who knew?
What have you been doing?
Well, I've been working on a book, and I've been trying to get some sleep. You know, I've got 25 years of sleep deprivation to catch up with, so I'm not quite there yet. I've only really been...
You got that at KQ?
Yeah, well, yeah. Having a sleep disorder, generally speaking, my bedtime is about 7 a.m., but when you have to get up at 6 to go to work, it doesn't work out so well.
Oh, that's awful. So, okay, you're writing a book. What's it about?
Well, it's a book about, it's a memoir, and a lot of it is about the 3 years when my dad was in a assisted living apartment, had dementia, and I kind of track his decline. It's, you know, I compare it to my philosophy throughout my life on radio. You come for the laughter and you stay for the tears.
And your father was Lou Gelfand.
Lou Gelfand.
Who was the ombudsman at the Star
Yep.
Tribune. So it's a serious book.
It's a funny book and it's a serious book. Yeah, it's tragic, it's comic, it's somewhere in between. My dad was a tremendous character, you know. You wouldn't know it from me, but he was an extremely negative man. And all of those sorts of tendencies that he had, those tropisms for gloom, they accentuated when he was in assisted living, because when you have dementia, basically what happens is that a part of your personality, generally that's least appealing, becomes the part that completely drives you, you know. And in most of us, especially men, it's basically whatever instinct you've been suppressing most of your life. So it tends to be either rage or extreme horniness. I always said I prayed for a masturbator, but I got a warrior. So that was my dad. He was pissed off. He managed to file several lawsuits when he had dementia.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, were you the chief caregiver of your father?
I was, yes. Okay. So I had a lot of help from my middle son, Max. So, but we were a team, and it was. You probably saw the movie What's Eating Gilbert Grape?
Yeah, I did.
Great movie.
It is wonderful.
And there's that line. He's talking about his retarded brother who's about to turn 18, wasn't supposed to make it past 10.
The younger brother was played by DiCaprio.
That's right, DiCaprio was his first big role.
Sure.
Just a great movie. And he says, Johnny Depp says, some days you hope he lives and some days you hope he doesn't. And that's kind of the way it is when you've got someone suffering, and I do mean suffering from dementia. You kind of question what it's all about. But as I said, within there's a lot of humor, like my dad's lawsuit to get his driver's license back, provided us with a lot of fun moments.
Why did he lose it?
Well, he lost because he was in about the 5th stage of dementia.
Okay,
so
fine.
we didn't worry too much. It's not like he could have started the car.
But it was a campaign for him.
And it's nice to know you can get a lawyer if you need to do something like that.
Did he had an attorney for this?
Oh, he had several attorneys. Are you kidding me? He had a dream team, a veritable dream team of attorneys.
Okay, but he was basically watching after readers for many, many years, and now he has his own team of support attorneys for this. What was filed a suit against the Minnesota Department of Transportation?
It was against the Department of Transportation, and I was his real bête noire. Because I had taken his license away the way he saw it. The only reason he wasn't on the road was because of me.
And that did not please him.
He vowed to take it to his grave, and I think he did, yeah.
Okay.
I always said that as long as my dad was driving, you were never safe at a block party, an art fair, or a swap meet. He'd go right through the barricades.
Did you get along with your dad in earlier years?
Oh, yeah. Sometimes it was kind of a tense truce, but yeah, I got along with them all right, yeah.
I've read some of your book. It's really, it's top rate, top shelf stuff.
I call the book, at least the working title is Extended Stay.
You talk a lot about guilt and being Jewish. How does that play into your life right now? What did you learn from being with your father for those last years?
Well, my father taught me basically throughout life that, you know, life is tough, it's unfair, everyone's out to screw you. And I think I pretty well managed to wash a lot of that stain off me, but it took a long time. You know, you really don't become a man until you hate your father. And then after that, you kind of try to repair the damage that's been done. So I see that as a lifelong process, to get to the point where you hate him, to get to the point where you can disavow him, and then to get to the point where you love him again. One thing about my dad is that his real passion in life was litigation. He would have liked to have been a lawyer, but instead he sued people, and not successfully for the most part, but I think it was the process that engaged him. The first lawsuit I remember when I was a kid was, I believe it was Gelfand versus Pilgrim Cleaners et al. Something about a stained lapel, I don't remember. But Gelfand versus Kaplan, now that one had the neighborhood riveted. Kaplan was his next door neighbor.
Okay. Yeah.
My dad was contending that his air conditioner was too loud. The air conditioning unit that Kaplan had was you know, almost under my dad's window.
That sounds like a lawsuit I'd file.
Yeah, it's a Hatfield McCoy sort of situation.
Sure, yeah.
And my dad actually had a very novel strategy, which I admired greatly.
Yeah.
My dad reasoned that the jury, which would almost certainly be all Gentiles, would be heavily anti-Semitic. So he wanted to portray Kaplan, and of course he had going for him the fact that Kaplan was instantly recognizable as a Jewish name. So he wanted to make out Kaplan to be the Jew, my dad being more or less neutral in that sense.
Sure, yeah.
So he had one more thing going for him. Kaplan was a physician. And my dad reasoned that if the jury hated Jews, they would really hate Jewish doctors, because there's nothing more Jewish than a Jewish doctor. So when my dad took the witness stand, he took great care to always refer to Dr. Kaplan. He would bite off the words Dr. Kaplan. And he lost.
He lost that one,
He
too.
did lose, yeah. Maybe it turned out these bastards weren't anti-Semitic after all. Who knew? I mean, it was such a tough break.
How did he get involved in the newspaper world?
Well, my dad, I mean, he always wanted to be either a lawyer or a newspaper guy. And he studied journalism at the University of Oklahoma, and he became a sports writer. He couldn't get a job in journalism, so he became a sports writer. And started out in the St. Paul paper, went to Minneapolis, and then eventually left, like a lot of these guys did, for public relations, because you could feed your family there.
But how did he become ombudsman for the
That was
Star
sort
Tribune?
of his retirement job. He knew Chuck Bailey, who was the editor at the time.
Yeah, great editor.
Listen, he was the lifeblood of the paper. He was the best editor I ever had.
He had a big personality to boot, too.
He had a huge personality. You know, he had his counterpart was Wally Allen, the managing editor, who was like this vampire who went to work every day with only one purpose, and that was to just suck the life out of the newspaper and just make sure all the reporters were dispirited. And then it was like a good cop, bad cop thing, and Bailey would pump you up. He'd say, don't listen to Wally. It was that kind of thing. So, but he liked my dad, and he wanted somebody who was not ever going to have another job in journalism, because he understood if you did the job well, everybody was going to hate you. You'd be done. And my dad he was about 65 at the time. So, you know, maybe he was 60, but so my dad really kind of fit the bill. My dad loved that job, loved newspapers, loved the job, and more than anything else, he loved sitting in judgment of people. So that was his ideal job. It married all the things he loved.
You got into journalism, too, as a student at the University of Minnesota. Many years ago, you worked for the Minnesota Daily. Do you remember your first lead?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you know, I kind of wandered into the Daily. You couldn't do that. You probably couldn't have done it 30 years ago, but at the time, of course, it was before Watergate, so there was no glamour associated with it. You were basically, you had the prestige of maybe being the vice president of the audiovisual club.
Okay.
And so I walked in the Daily, and I said, I found Doug Stone, who was the managing editor. Great guy, turned out to be. He worked with me at the Tribune. And I said, well, what do I have to do to get a job here? And he kind of looked at me, and he said something like, well, talk to someone else. And so I talked to someone else and filled out some form, and they said, well, you know, not much going on this week, but this guy, this author, Truman Capote, I think. I don't even think they know how to pronounce his name
Sure,
at the time.
Truman, yeah.
You're going to edit that out to make me look stupid, aren't you?
No,
okay,
we're going to keep that.
So they said this guy, you know, he's doing this speech at Northrop, and they sent me to cover it, but they didn't really intend to publish it. They just thought, you know, it would be like sort of like an application.
Sure, yeah.
So I went over to Northrop, and Truman Capote was, he started to talk. Of course, you know how Truman Capote talked.
Sure.
And the crowd started to titter. They were kind of chuckling and laughing because they probably hadn't heard anybody talk like that before. You know, he had that high whine and a lisp, and
right, yeah.
And anyway, but within maybe 2 minutes, the crowd, you couldn't, you know, it was just absolute. People were leaning forward in their seats to catch every word. It was spellbinding. Yeah. And so
what was your lead?
The lead, to get back to the lead, was it was something like Truman Capote lisped his way into the hearts of 2,000 people.
Wonderful. I like that lead, yeah.
And the whole career was built on that tiny little stone there.
Well, did you ever think you'd be quite the writer that Truman Capote is?
I don't think so. I don't think I ever will be, but you know, I try. And he was a giant, but he was a great inspiration in Cold Blood, because when what they used to call the new journalism came along, you know, I think all of us who were young and learning at the time realized what we could do with the narrative form, that we could write news stories that seemed like they were real stories and not news stories. I was managing editor of the Daily as a 19-year-old. I went to work for the Wall Street Journal. I always like to say that I spent almost the entire arc of my career working my way down. I was at the Wall Street Journal at 22.
Yeah.
And I think about 10 years later, maybe 12, I found myself doing a football column for Bob Lertzema's Viking Report.
Ooh.
So, you know, if that doesn't humble you, nothing will. I actually took the buyout at the paper.
Yeah.
Back when the papers merged.
Yeah, when the Tribune and Star became the Strib, right?
Yeah. And if you, I was
now,
still,
why did you do that?
I was young enough at the time. I was still in my mid-30s, and I figured it was either that or I was going to die in one of those little cubicles. And it wasn't a fun place to be after the merger. It was before, but it wasn't after that.
Well,
and they gave you like a year's salary and 5 years of medical insurance, which today would be worth 10 years in salary if you wanted to leave.
Well, I can remember you covering baseball, too. Mm-hmm. Your friend Rod Carew comes to mind, of course.
Rod Carew.
But you were one of the finest sports writers in the country at that time. But did you miss that life at all?
You know, there was never any beat I wanted to be on for more than a year or two.
Yeah.
And I thought that was one of my charms, but the editors disagreed. They wanted me to stay on baseball. But you're on the road, you know, probably 5 months of the year, counting spring training, the World Series. I was just starting to raise a family. And I think to a certain extent, being around people who hate you and threaten to kill you every day, it takes its toll. I mean, I took a certain amount of pride in it because I didn't cover the team the way a lot of sports writers do. I really wasn't a fan.
Sure.
And the team, luckily for me, the team really sucked in those days. So it was a lot of fun to just trash the team. And it was gallows humor, but it was basically the only appropriate way to do it.
Well, it was during that time that I think I may have been the guy to introduce you to electronic media.
It was,
I was at KTC at that point. We did a series with Greg Zenard helped me called
That's
Spectators,
right. Yep.
and you were one of the regulars. Mm-hmm. And it may have set you in the wrong direction.
I'm worried sick that the Vikings are going to leave town. Well, not for our sake, but for theirs. The truth is, I don't think Bud Grant can survive in California.
What do you recall about those days?
Well, I recall I was usually high on crack when I did those.
They hadn't invented crack back
Oh, yeah,
then.
I guess you're
Come
right.
on, no,
You're
it
right.
was something else. I think you were high on ego.
Life.
And, on life, yeah, that's what.
It was
right.
a lot of fun. I mean, it really was, because as a newspaper reporter, the thing is, I always thought, you know, this isn't that much fun anymore. At least I thought that after a few years. And I thought, really what I should do is get a job where I can just make funny remarks or any remarks at all about what's going on. And eventually that led to not only what you did, but 25 years in radio.
Well, that's cool. We were just a blink in your life, of course.
Yeah,
but
maybe that's probably what ignited the spark.
Well, that works sometimes, doesn't it? I mean,
It does.
They didn't put a leash on us. They said, do humorous commentaries, we'll run them.
I'm sick and tired of being insulted by holier-than-thou vegetarians. Yeah, I eat meat, and I'm proud of it. Juicy red meat dripping with blood.
It enabled Craig and I to put some of the brightest, smartest, and funniest people, and people with character.
Plus me.
On television. No, that includes you. With a voice nasal voice like yours.
Who would have thought?
Your looks and all that. This is a guy who would hang out in a St. Paul bar. A guy you'd want to talk to and hear from.
And of course, you had a great show back in the old days on Channel 5.
No. We in television news work very hard to penetrate the cosmetics of the business.
And you were really the only, I mean, I don't want to get this into one of these mutual gratification sessions. Well, we are sitting sort of in a circle.
Yeah, right, yes.
You were really the only guy in the Twin Cities. People don't know this, but you were really the only producer in the Twin Cities who was doing creative television, doing some humorous stuff, doing anything at all that had a spark at all, because everybody else was doing these dry local news shows. When I started out on the radio, the first day I was in the studio, and the first day I was like a regular, the general manager of the station came running in during a commercial break and said, "You got to get that guy off the show. He'll never make it in radio." He got greased a couple years later, and, and I hung on for another 2 decades.
Well, you met Tom Bernard because you were writing kind of flack for some kind of
what happened
magazine,
was,
right?
when I left the newspaper, I just basically took on every gig I could get while I figured out what I was going to do.
Sure.
My favorite job during that time was, anything that came over the transom you take when you're a freelancer. And for about a year, I edited a gynecology newsletter. Oh. I learned a lot, I have to say, although I was never able to put any of it to practical use.
Okay.
But I just did everything I could. One of the better gigs I had was I was the local correspondent for Ad Age.
Sure.
And I thought, I should do a story on this local voiceover community, because it was just starting to get big.
Yeah.
And Bernard was the king of them all.
That's right. Yeah.
So that's how I met Tom, and that's how I got on the show. And then eventually, which was really bizarre, I had a voiceover career of my own.
You were occasionally positioned as being the token liberal.
Token liberal, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I always said that during the evolution of the show, I started out as the voice of reason, and I wound up being the voice of treason.
Okay, that's a good line.
Was not in sync with my fellow employees, but they were all people I liked.
Well, they're all great people.
Yeah.
I mean, very enjoyable people. They're like my neighbors.
We just didn't happen to share the same world.
But you're the kind of guy I want to spend time with in a bar. Your role is pretty important here, given the coverage and huge audience of that radio station. You were the counterbalance.
Well,
to a lot of the stuff that they were bringing in.
To some extent. I think what we didn't really appreciate in those, well, there even times are more polarized today, but it was kind of the beginning of any sort of possibility of public, of any kind of public compromise at all. Yeah. And I think what we maybe didn't realize at the time was that people really were not tuning in for our insights into the political scene and life in general. They just wanted to have a good laugh. They wanted a fart joke.
Yeah.
And they wanted a sound bite. And I think we all kind of strayed from the path there. Eventually,
by getting too serious?
Well, I think eventually, personally, I got kind of comfortable in the later years in my role as sort of a comedic sniper, sit on the rooftop, and when someone comes to you, fire a one-liner.
Sure.
That's what people wanted, and hey, it's show business,
And it worked.
And it worked,
It worked, yeah. Let's go to current events. Mm-hmm. Jesse Ventura won a decision in court today for his case. Give us your take about that.
I just saw a lot of irony in the case, because both of these guys, Kyle, the professional assassin, and Jesse, the professional self-promoter, they both were sort of trying to monetize in some way their celebrity status as heroes. But in real life, there are no heroes. When you subject reality to the Socratic process, which is what happens in a courtroom, everybody comes out with a pretty wretched stain. So I thought it was kind of fascinating to watch the trial unfold. And really, Jesse wound up kind of like the same way he wound up as a politician. He wound up just sort of by kind of standing there. He got a lot of money. You know, he didn't really have to do very much. And it was classic Jesse, but it was really the way he's always operated.
Well, a lot of people in Minnesota are down on him. I like him. I think, you know, Minnesota needs more big characters. We don't have enough of them.
You know, and they were both big characters.
Yeah.
Kyle was a big character.
Yeah, but
Jesse,
not in Minnesota.
Not in Minnesota.
Yeah.
Jesse was a big character. I thought that, you know, the greatest irony of all, given Kyle's profession and given what happened at the trial, was that, and the saddest thing really is that he didn't get to live to write another book about the trial, which he could have called Backfire.
Yeah. What about the current political scene in Minnesota? The Republican right wing, the old-fashioned Republicans, the progressive Republican, or the independent Republicans, as we used to call them, and the DFL.
You know, all politicians are amoebas. That whatever shape they have to take to survive, they will. In Minnesota, that means you've got this weird specter of the almost moderate Republican. I mean, my kids, they're in their 30s.
Are they Republican?
Late 20s. Oh, no.
No, they're not.
I still call them my kids.
Okay.
So you know they're not. They find it absolutely astonishing and amazing that I can tell them honestly that I have voted for Republicans in my lifetime. Because, you know, it wasn't, not on a national scale.
Can you name a few?
Oh, you know, local. We had local legislators in St. Louis Park.
Yeah.
Who Jim Rhodes was a guy who was a lifelong Republican, but he was a moderate Republican, a reasonable
Steve
guy.
Simon, our colleague,
Steve
defeated
Simon,
him.
Yeah. And,
now running for Secretary of State.
Well, he's probably the most bright, shining light in the Democratic Party right now. Not as you find any politician on the way up who's under 70, and it's almost a gift. And by the way, I will say this, just as an aside.
Yeah.
If I was king for a day, an hour, and this kind of comes from my experience watching people decline in nursing homes, the first thing I'd do is pass a rule that nobody over the age of 72 could drive at night or run for president. You know, it's amazing. You look at the landscape, and you know, Hillary Clinton, if she wins, she'd be 70, and Ronald Reagan wasn't much older than that when he had dementia. We don't know exactly when he had it, but he sure as hell had it in his 70s.
Yeah.
And you know, it's just people. But I guess the point I'm making is one of the things that I really figured out was people really do decline. And anyone says, "Oh, I'm as sharp at 70 as I was at 60, as I was at 50, as I was at 40. It's a bunch of crap. Those brain cells are dying every day. You reach a point in life where everything kind of moderates, and the maturation process and the brain decline sort of intersect, you know, and they start going the other direction. And that's it. That's your peak, and that's like 32.
And these are things we should consider if Hillary wants to run for president.
I mean, I don't know that you're going to have much choice in the matter. Now, it could be. I mean, Jeb Bush is basically the same age as Hillary, for example.
Yeah.
And the guys running on the Republican side who are younger are, of course, basically they're just so far off the chart that I can't.
Ted Cruz and company.
I don't know how you make a Ryan. I don't know how you make a case. Age alone wouldn't be enough to. I'd vote for someone with dementia rather than them. But I'm just saying, you know, we could use some. When Elizabeth Warren is the young blood in the party, you do have a problem there. That's all I'm saying. You know, and I'm elderly myself. I don't drive at night. I don't actually drive in the daytime very often. I'm well aware of the things that I don't do as well as I did, you know, 10 or 15 years ago. And what happened in this country as people started to realize they were going to live to be in their 80s, and it was basically our parents, it was the greatest generation, we started getting, the big issue became age discrimination. You don't hear anything about it anymore.
Sure.
Now what we need is a lot more age discrimination. But in those days, you know, we have to get these. You know, we can't have mandatory retirement because, well, in the case of the greatest generation, because they were going to live to be 90, and they were going to work until the day they died because that's what they like to do. That's the only thing they like to do. And so we went completely the wrong direction. You know, my dad My dad, in his search for a doctor who would say, yeah, he can drive, there's nothing wrong with this man, went through 5 doctors. He finally found a guy who was 88. And the guy said, there's nothing wrong with Lou Gelfand. You know, I mean, that shouldn't happen. A guy who's 88 shouldn't be practicing medicine. An emeritus position at a university, that's fine. But making life and death decisions, that's not so good.
Best thing about baseball, no Packer fans.
And umpires don't throw handkerchiefs.
In baseball, most of the hot dogs are in the stands.
The name of the game isn't stolen from soccer.
And in baseball, managers yell at umpires, not their own players.
And old-timers can still play the game.
I'm with Mike Gelfand, a really former great baseball writer. I love baseball. I'm a Twins fan. And frankly, I feel like the kid in high school who got slighted by the most beautiful looking girl in the class again.
Your point being?
They always disappoint. Are they disappointing to you too?
Yeah, I don't know that they're the most beautiful girl in the class. They're more like the members of the dance team, you know. It's and the guys like me who are in the audio-visual club. That's really what they're like. You know, it's the worst investment as a taxpayer that I've ever made since I bought Enron. It's
the new Target Stadium.
The Twins in general. I mean,
Twins
it's
in
the
general,
Target
yeah.
Stadium, yes.
Yeah.
And all the things we do for the Polad family. When I drive home, I drive around Lake of the Isles if I'm downtown, and I always go by at least one of the Polad mansions. I call it Brokeback Mansion. It's this mansion that's metastasizing, you know, on a daily basis. It's like, you know, it's like one of those time-lapse things you see. If you go by, say, once a month, there's another story added to the house. Each time the public kicks in another few million for the Polad family. It's very distasteful. And watching us pay for all this and then watching the Twins get rid of all their good players, for what? Because they're rebuilding? How long have the Twins been rebuilding?
Since
30 years, right?
1991, I think.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah.
It's a fraud. And as a former reporter who has always been a little bit disgusted by the cheerleading of the sports media, I really find it distressing that each year, right around the time when we realize this team sucks like all the others, we are subjected to story after story about the brilliant young players coming up through the farm system. They've been coming up through the farm system in those past 25 years. They never seem to make it. I don't know. Aaron Hicks was one of those guys. You know, he couldn't hit my weight, let alone his.
Then they get good, like Torrey Hunter and some of the others, and they get traded.
Look at Kadire. Do you know that if you're a real baseball fan, you really follow him? Here's an interesting thing. For almost exactly the amount of money that they paid for Ricky Nolasco, they could have kept Kadire. So which do you think would have been the better move? Kadire is that's like the Twins' answer to Johnny Flynn. That's the franchise record. That's the fatal error. But the guys who make the mistakes, they're still there. The guys who were the mistakes, well, you know, Johnny Flynn, he was the Timberwolf guy who they took in the first round. Yeah. And he wound up actually not being able to make it in China. I mean, you know, China in sports is the opposite of New York. If you can't make it there, you can't make it anywhere. No, I'm serious about this. God damn it, I'm mad as
Michael, thank you.
And you are? Your point B.
Democratic Visions is independently handcrafted by lefty Southwest Suburban volunteers for the entire metro region.